Welcome back. Today we're going to do a really quick one on the SMSL RAW-HA1. So that is this guy right here. And I think before we begin, I want to thank APOS Audio for letting me borrow the HA1. But two, I wanted to kind of put this out quicker because of the sale that's actually running right now. For those of you who are already looking at the HA1 and other SMSLs or other products that are on sale at Topping, their sale actually started a few days ago and it ends in 3 days. So for those of you who are interested in picking up the HA1, the normal price is about $249. It's on sale for $214.99, about $215. So I'm kind of rushing this just to say, hey, if you're already looking at it, now is probably a good time to pick it up. But we will go through it. And I guess what's most important about the HA1 and what's a little bit different than other SMSLs you may be familiar with is this one they call the all-in-one. So number one, it's a DAC, so you do have a Cirrus Logic 43131 inside doing the analog conversion, but you also do have headphone output. So there's a headphone amp, so that's a 4.4, that is a 6.35, and on the back you do have speaker outputs as well. So this sort of is the one box that does them all, and I think, and just to add on to the all-in-one nature of it, I think it also does HDMI input as well. So I think they're trying to get all the inputs, all the outputs into one single box and call it the all-in-one. So I think it's actually a pretty interesting product, and they certainly are putting it out at a very attractive price. But we'll go through the interface really quickly. So one, this is the newer style graphic interface. I have the older SMSL interface. This new kind of wheel over here, the info wheel on the side, is actually kind of the newer style. I have the older one, which is mainly just the volume, and you could actually switch to the older style through the menu, but the newer style is just a little prettier. So if we actually push that in, we actually get the menus. So you can do inputs, which kind of look like this. Maybe I can do this with my other hand so we can see what's going on. So inputs, again, you do have all the inputs, so USB, Bluetooth, optical, coaxial, HDMI with audio return channel, ARC, I think that's what it is, and aux-in, which is probably what they're calling RCA. So on the outputs, you can actually switch between the speakers and the headphones that way. So depending, you can't do both at the same time, but you can split them out separately like that. So PCM filters, those of you who are used to the Cirrus Logic filters, you do have access to those, and there is a non-oversampling one at the bottom if you're into that as well. The equalizer is actually something very cool about this particular model, which is something that's missing on some of my older SMSL models. They don't have the equalizer. Some of them have sound coloring that they've had over the years. They've had different words for it, but I think direct is kind of what it means, direct. Tone controls we'll talk about in a second. And then you've got other equalizer modes, so bass, super bass, rock, soft, clear, and those actually correlate to this graph right here. So you can take a look at those online. They are various flavors of V-shapes or boosting bass and treble and different kind of variations on those. So that's pretty cool. On the tone, as I said, you could actually switch this to tone, and then when you scroll down a little bit more, you could actually adjust the treble. So you actually get tone controls, treble and bass control separately. If you're not into those EQ presets, you can actually set them bass and treble separately, which is, again, is another thing that's missing from some of the previous models, which is actually pretty cool. You could set the function key on the remote. The UI style, as I said, you could actually go, I think, universal, maybe the older style, and set the language and dimmer and reset and all that stuff. So that's the basics of everything you got in the menu. And again, this is a sort of a nicer, updated version of menus on my older SMSLs. They're not quite as fancy as that, but that's what they look like in more current models. So very nice looking, and that's, I think, everything that's there on the menu, and you could do those with the remote as well. Yeah, so this remote style without that little info graphic on the other side is sort of what the older one looked like. This is just a slightly better looking of the older display that they used to have. So what is this one? As I said, it's an SMSL all-in-one. It's really a combination of their DAC headphone speaker amp. So the DAC is the Cirrus Logic 43131, as I said. The amp is Infineon. So for those of you who are familiar with SMSL models, you sort of recognize that the headphone, particularly SMSL headphone amps, typically use op amps, and you get some various flavors of OPAs, and they have some models with different ones, but you typically see this combination of maybe ESS and op amps. On the speaker amps, you typically see Infineon. So that's why I say this is really a combination of some things that they've used in different products, but put into the single box, and that's why they call it the all-in-one. So I think it's actually pretty cool in that respect. And you do get all-in-one inputs, as I said, HDMI, RCA, Bluetooth, USB, optical, coaxial. Outputs are these two plus speakers, plus there's a subwoofer RCA on the back as well. So any other useful features, and as I said, those PCM filters are actually pretty nice. The EQ presets, which look like this, you do get a bass and super bass, which this is probably super bass, but yeah, I think those are actually pretty useful. And again, I think just having the ability to 1 click, 2 clicks, bump up the bass, that's kind of a popular thing to do. I think that is a very useful thing to do, and probably more user-friendly than some of the sound coloring options that they've had in the past. So I actually dig this. So anything missing from functionality, I think some of their streamer Wi-Fi functionality, and I think that's kind of a work in progress. I had a chance to try out the N100, and that wouldn't quite fit in with this model of all-in-one. That was more of piping everything through their Volume Mio. It was a special app that really kind of funneled all the input through one app, and then that kind of controlled the box. That I think SMSL is probably working on different streamer functionality, but I would say that if you're looking for all-in-ones and one box on your desk that fits, that does everything, that's probably one little bit. If you're looking for something that has app support or Wi-Fi functionality, I think that's not quite there in this particular model. So who should buy this one? And I can go either way on it. If you are looking for a desktop box to power your speakers, I think this does a great job at that. But if you're also on the other side, if you are or you're looking for a desktop box that powers your speakers and do occasional headphone use, perfect box for that. But the other way is also, I think, works out quite well. If you're looking for a desktop headphone amp and you're going to use occasional speakers, I think they covered both. I was really surprised that, and I wasn't sure. As soon as I saw the Infineon, I'm like, I bet you the speakers are probably going to sound better than the headphone outputs. But I think they did a good job at actually giving you very, very nice sounding headphone amps. And this wasn't really a speaker amp with kind of token headphone output. So I kind of give them credit for making those headphone outputs sound actually quite nice. So first impression on this one, again, if you've heard a Cirrus Logic 43131 or a 198, a portable USB dongle DAC, you're very familiar with how this one is going to sound. It sounds almost like a reference Cirrus Logic implementation, and that's great compared to others which add too much color. And again, I'm kind of a fan of SMSL and the way they do reference dials, sort of in the same vein that Topping does it. They don't add too much color. They tend to hover around transparent sound signatures, uncolored, flat, neutral, however you want to describe it. So I was actually kind of happy to see that the HA1 was along the lines of that same kind of no coloring, uncolored reference style. That is what I wanted to hear. That's exactly what I heard. So, and I wasn't sure if it was, and as I said, I wasn't really sure it was going to lean towards a speaker amp or a headphone amp, but the headphone amp sounds exactly the way it should sound. And again, much like a reference style Cirrus Logic DAC amp, it sounds very familiar for those of you who are familiar with that. And on the sound, again, much like other CS DAC amps, relatively flat, but a slight upper mid emphasis. And most sound like this. This isn't really any different. I think they all tend to have a slight bump right in the upper mids. It just brings vocals a little bit more forward. I think it's a very general appealing style sound, but be aware that that's kind of what it sounds like. But what was really most important about the sound is it's just there's no bass or treble coloring. They didn't want to make it sound warmer or brighter or less bright. And if you do want those things, they did give you EQ presets to certainly do that. So, but I think definitely in the realm of other CS desktops that I've tried, I do appreciate that they treated the Cirrus Logic and this particular model along the lines of how they treat their other models and give you a flatter, more neutral style sound signature. If you want to add color to it, you can certainly do that in EQ, or tone controls, but just the basic sound of it, this flat, neutral, that's kind of my thing. And again, I kind of added there that you can see right at the bottom. That's certainly my bias. I like flat, neutral, transparent style amps. So this is a very good match for me, but think about your own preferences, and maybe you like it a little bit warmer. Maybe you'll like these EQ preferences, or maybe you'll just like the tone controls. But as a base sound signature, I prefer the flat, neutral, transparent style, and that's kind of exactly what you get on the HA1. So again, those of you who are already looking for it, the sale ends in a few days, so do check that out. And otherwise, that is what I got on the HA1. And thank you guys again for tuning in, and I will see you next time.